Thank you. Senator Bell, item 1 on the file is SB 12. And just to remind everyone that this committee provides the opportunity for 2 main witnesses, 2 minutes each for support, and similarly 2 main witnesses, 2 minutes each for opposition. Thank you, Senator Bell.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. This is SB 12, and first I would like to thank the committee and the staff for all their hard work on this important bill, and I have author amendments as reflected in the analysis. So the amendments further specify the population of crossover and probationary youth who would be eligible for extended foster care benefits. And year 2010, I authored AB 12, which extended foster youth benefits from 18 to 21. Youth who are forced to leave the foster care system at age 18 face significant challenges such as high rates of homelessness, incarceration, and low rates of graduation. Currently, some of the foster youth who cross over into juvenile justice system are not receiving their benefits when they exit juvenile halls or camps. And this is happening because their placement order for extended benefits essentially disappears when they cross over. Madam Chair, SB 12 allows these 2 populations to access their foster care benefits. So this bill simply gives them the right to have their benefits. The bill helps youth who enter the foster care system through probation, meaning they have committed some kind of crime or status offense also. And a judge determines that they can't be placed back at home because it's unsafe for them. And these children slip through the cracks between the child welfare system and the delinquency system. AB 12 inadvertently left the most vulnerable of our youth out, so we are fixing this by SB 12 actualizes the intent of our earlier AB 12 and ensures that no foster youth is left behind. And I respectfully ask for aye vote, and we have witnesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Witness, please identify yourself.
My name is Joseph Backett. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the chair and the rest of the committee for having me. I'm really honored to be here to be able to give my testimony on behalf of my brother's experience. My name, again, is Joseph. I'm 19 years old. I know I don't look like it. And the second youngest out of 6 siblings. It was 2 brothers specifically that I grew up with, the eldest named Matthew and the middle child, Tarek. Growing up, my brothers were all I had. At the age of 3, my mother left us at home with the babysitter, and she didn't return for weeks. My older sister actually dropped out of high school at the time to take care of us. I was later on told that my mother returned, but that didn't last long either. At the age of 4, we moved into our grandmother's 1-bedroom apartment. After that, my mother would only return a visit once a year if we were lucky. For 7 years, my brothers and I lived there in fear, not knowing what little mistake would lead to our next beating. Social workers were called, and they visited us, but we were always told to lie about our punishments. I remember my grandmother specifically telling me that foster homes would only treat us worse, so we figured we were better off just living with her. But at the age of 11, we decided to run away. My sister again took us in, but unfortunately her efforts were quickly disparaged because not even a month or 2 later, my 2 brothers and I were removed from her custody due to illegal guardianship, and we were placed into foster care. Tarek entered the foster care system the same day as I did, although he was labeled as the troubled child. As his brother, I understand him to be a good person who has been troubled and then made bad choices. Granted, his reputation was not without precedent. Tarek acted out on several occasions. One instance in particular that changed his life more than anyone could have imagined occurred almost 5 years after entering the foster care system. Tarek was incarcerated. He borrowed his group home's vehicle, and without asking for permission, of course, and he was then placed in a juvenile facility for approximately 10 months. If you do the math, you'd find that he turned 18 while being in this facility, which was only 24 days before he was released. Thus, he was ineligible for foster youth-specific resources. So when he was released, he temporarily stayed with our sister, but soon to return to join my brother Matthew in the streets of San Diego, sleeping on curbs and thieving to eat. There are several resources out there for homeless, but nothing like those for former foster youth. I myself am a proud recipient of Assembly Bill 12, and with assistance like this, I can only imagine the difference in Tarek's outcome. I currently attend UC Berkeley, and I, again, can't imagine not being able to focus all my efforts onto school because having to worry about financial insecurities. Issues like these are prevented by AB 12 and other resources, but the criteria to receive them are exclusive to kids that fall under a dependency status that is sometimes arbitrarily attributed. Tarek didn't receive AB 12 and he struggled. He struggled a lot, but he is now successfully working 2 jobs, living with his girlfriend among our brother and our mother. Tarek told me that he is proud that his story can actually affect and make a difference, and so he wanted to thank you all for your time and consideration. Today, I am 19 years old, and throughout these years, my brothers and I have reciprocated our love and support for one another to survive. I see my efforts to help my brother to be just that, another act of reciprocated love and support to aid Tarek in surviving systematic disadvantages. I know this bill is the key needed to unlock the resources for those they were meant for, because it is for those that need it the most. I'm a witness to a flaw within the system, and so I urge you to vote aye to SB 12, not because we want it, but because people need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Any other witnesses in support? And if you come up briefly, I think that statement said most of it.
Hi, good afternoon. Angie Schwartz, I'm the policy director with the Alliance for Children's Rights, and we were one of the original co-sponsors of AB 12, which was the landmark legislation that extended foster care until the age of 21. And since its very earliest days, we've intended extended foster care to protect both our youth who were adjudicated through our dependency system, as well as those youth who are adjudicated through the delinquency system. AB 12 has always covered both populations of young people. Unfortunately, some of those probation youth in particular slip through the cracks, and generally because they don't have that order for foster care on that magic birthday, their 18th birthday. And there's 2 primary ways that SB 12 fixes that problem. The first is for the youth who have been in foster care, and then after the age of 14, they've had a foster care order sometime after the age of 14. And then at some point with their involvement in the probation system, they get released to a relative instead of being placed with the relative. And it sounds like a small distinction, but it happens with some frequency, that they identify a relative to care for the young person because they know that that child cannot be returned to the home of a parent. It's not a safe place for the young person to go, but instead of placing with the relative, they release to the relative, and that makes it so that the young person is not eligible for extended foster care. And the second is, as our young witness spoke to, those young people who are in secure confinement on their 18th birthday. So we didn't intend to exclude those young people in extended foster care, and SB 12 will fix it so that we no longer exclude those young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, please.
Gail Johnson-Vaughn with Families Now. I just want to reinforce what Angie is saying and to say that not to stigmatize these young people because they've gotten in trouble. They've been traumatized. Our system traumatizes them more. AB 12 was intended to give them more time to grow up. These are the ones who need it most. Please support the bill.
Thank you very much. Next witness, very briefly, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Kat McCullough. I'm a legal fellow at the Youth Law Center. We're here today as co-sponsors of this bill, and we urge your aye vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kim Lewis, representing the California Coalition for Youth, which represents a lot of runaway and homeless youth providers in the state who serve these youth who do slip through the cracks, and support. Thank you.
Thank you.
California Alliance of Child and Family Services, an organization of 115 foster care and children's mental health providers in support.
Thank you.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter, in strong support.
Thank you very much. Are there any witnesses, any other witnesses in support? Any witnesses in opposition? Please come forward. Again, 2 minutes each, if you would. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Rosemary Lamb McCool with the Chief Probation Officers of California. We're here to talk with you about our position on the bill. We are opposed to the measure. Some of that is on fiscal grounds regarding the current capacity to serve the existing population. However, we also want to take this time to talk to you about the overarching policy regarding AB 12 and who is most appropriate to serve these youth when housing is really the only issue, not the only issue, but the main issue when they successfully have completed probation. And so who is the most appropriate entity to continue serving that youth if they've completed their probation terms. So I will turn it over. We have Chief Jim Salio from San Luis Obispo County. He is the chief of the county probation department. He is here to offer his professional experience and what's been happening at the county level.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. The probation is struggling right now supporting the youth that we're currently providing extended foster care for under AB 12, and now expanding the services to include youth who were not in placement at the time they turn 18. Will even stretch those services even that much further. The probation departments have no problem with the idea of giving extended foster care to a child who was a crossover child who was a 300, came into the 602 system, completed their probation, and then returned back to a relative or home or those kind of things. The problem is that many times when a child comes from the 300 system into the 600 system, they never go back to the 300 system even though they cannot return to their family, and that becomes an issue. So we believe that the appropriate agency to supervise these youth would be Child Welfare Services, not the probation department. They're more suited to do this, and they had a relationship with the youth to begin with. Many times probation youth, they do leave probation and go reside with a relative and not place with a relative. And many times that's due to the fact that they want to get off probation. Leaving a child on probation is not appropriate just because they need housing. If a child needs housing, the child should return back to Child Welfare Services. So this is part of the problem with the Welfare Institution Code 241.1 and how we return kids back from the 602 system back to the 300 system. So we would support the idea of those kids receiving those extended foster care services, but really we think the appropriate agency to supervise those youth would be the Child Welfare Services.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in opposition? All right, before you leave, so what you're suggesting is you think that this concept is a good one, but that you think that the Child Welfare Services should take responsibility because you're not able to handle it, or?
That's correct. We're stretched. We receive no funding for AB 12 to provide services for these youth. And these are kids that were on probation, that were in foster care, turned 18, and so we continue to work with them as they age out of the foster care system. But we're talking a population that's no longer on probation, may have not been on probation for 2 to 3 years, but were on the child welfare system, so it seems most appropriate that they would go back to the child welfare system.
And are you proposing there be money available to them, or, I mean, usually agencies want more work, but they want to get paid for it, so if they got the money, or if there were money available, you still would send it back to the Child Welfare Services?
Yes.
Okay, I'll let Senator Bell respond to that.
We may have the people respond.
Hello.
I can give my response, but I'll prefer to.
All right, let's refer, I'm sorry. So it seems like the debate is not in the substance of the need for the work, but the fact that you don't have the resources and you think they should go back to child welfare anyway, even if they've been in the juvenile justice system.
And I think one of the core issues is probation's mission is to make sure that the individual has completed their probation terms. And so for these youth, they have completed their probation terms. They've been successful. And so really our role within serving that youth has been completed. They have been successful. And so in our view, you want to allow that youth to have that success. And so our system isn't geared towards the same delivery of services necessarily. Sometimes there is some crossover. But I think for these youth, they have been successful, they've completed their probation terms, and so our role with that youth has been completed. And so the question, I think, for us is when the housing is the issue before the child, and whether the housing is inappropriate, unsuitable, is that a probation issue or is that a child welfare issue?
We have a response from the supporters of the bill. Why probation versus child welfare?
Yes, thank you so much. I want to address that question and some of the things that were said. So just to be clear, a youth does not have to stay on probation in order to access the benefits of AB 12 currently. if they have completed their rehab goals and they no longer need delinquency court jurisdiction, and they're 17.5, that jurisdiction can be terminated and they can enter into transition jurisdiction. Every county in California was allowed to pick what agency to supervise transition-aged youth. Every county elected for probation to supervise transition-aged youth. If a child is younger than 17.5 and they've completed the terms of their probation, delinquency jurisdiction is no longer needed, but that youth still doesn't have permanency, those goals weren't met for that youth, then that youth, the probation officer could file a dependency petition and that youth could go back to the dependency court, or the court could recognize that youth and do it through their own processes. These youth deserve the same case planning as any other foster youth. These are foster youth. They're probation supervised foster youth, but we can't create this second class of foster youth. It's not in line with federal law, and it's our moral obligation to really provide these youth the same services, the same case planning, the same permanency planning. You know, once we have identified a youth who has been abused or neglected, we have an obligation to certain things. If we do not obtain permanency for that youth, it's not, we can't just say too bad and let them go, you know, it's child welfare's problem, not ours. It's like, you have to do case planning with these youth as a probation officer, and if you're drawing down 4E money for those youth for these for placements in group homes, you have to be providing them with the same services as youth who are child welfare supervised.
Last question, would you respond to that?
Yes.
And then I'll open it up to the committee.
The issue becomes the child has completed everything they need to complete on probation, and permanency for them to remain in foster care remains, they have to be under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court as a ward or as a dependent of the court. But probation contends is that there's no need to keep them as a ward of the court and subject to all the terms and conditions of probation when they no longer need probation. And really the child should go back to the child welfare system as any other child who has an improper home to live in and needs to be cared for. So what we're saying is that these youth should, if they want to go into extended foster care and have completed probation, done everything on probation, we're not in placement under probation at the time of turning 17 and a half, that those youth should go back to child welfare and be supervised. It's the most appropriate agency.
It's not a second, we're not relegating them to a different system than we have now, that is this a system that's used for any other situations?
Absolutely. This is the same, they would get the same level of service, maybe.
No, that's not my question. Question is this a system, is this a procedure that we do in other cases when youth have already met their, okay.
Yes.
So
we do that now. Unfortunately, it's not as easy to get a child back into the 300 system. And it's true that every county can decide whether probation or child welfare should supervise the case in extended foster care. Unfortunately, every child welfare system in the state of California said, no, probation, you must supervise this case. So even though probation says it's not best to be supervised by.
So what I hear is everybody saying you do it, which is part of the problem, that these foster youth reinforces the sense that nobody wants them. Anyway, would you just finally respond, then we'll open it up.
Yes, exactly. That's why we need this law, because we do not, it's about the youth. We want to make sure that the youth is protected, that if they do not achieve permanency, if we do not achieve permanency for this youth, if they do not have a parent or legal guardian to go through, that we continue to support them in their transition to adulthood. These are youth that we as Californians have agreed to parent. We need to continue to parent them. And just to clarify again, if a youth completes their rehab goals and they're 17.5, they no longer need to remain on probation. They're no longer subject to the terms of their probation. They can go to transition jurisdiction and be supervised by probation. So just to clarify that. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear.
No, I understand, but that's not where I see the battle here.
Oh, no, but I just wanted to be clear.
We're talking about the population that's not 17 and a half years old that has to remain on probation in order to receive those extended foster care services. What we're saying, or leave probation and can come back sometime later on and get extended foster care services. So we have no problem with the population that we currently have under AB 12. We'd like resources for it, but we're doing the best we can.
But you just don't want to extend it.
Exactly.
And you think that we should extend it because?
Well, so the population, you're talking about someone who's younger than 17.5, who we never achieved permanency for. What happens to them? Child welfare doesn't accept them back, and you find that as problematic, but so are we not going to do anything for them at that point?
Well, wait a minute, my understanding from your perspective was that they do go back to or they can go back to the child dependency court. They can.
So if the bill was changed to say that if the child goes back into extended foster care, they're automatically supervised by child welfare services.
But that's not what you're calling for here.
I'm unclear what you just said, I'm sorry.
So in the situation we're talking about where a child leaves the probation system, is off probation, and was in placement either before probation and child welfare services or placed by probation, when they leave probation and they're off probation, they're no longer in the probation system, and they come back at 18 and want to go back into extended foster care, what we're proposing in this bill is that child welfare then becomes the supervising agency for them.
And you're saying, no, it shouldn't be child welfare, it should be probation because?
Well, also, to clarify a statement, I believe you mentioned that you don't mind the population you're currently serving. This bill only kicks in after 18. No, that's the extended foster care. So that is the population that's currently being served by probation. If a youth successfully completes the terms of their probation and permanency is not achieved through case management of the probation system, that youth should continue to be supervised by the probation's, no, the youth should go back to the child welfare system, and the probation officer should file a dependency petition. That's the way to do it.
Right.
They can do that now, they can do that after the law happens, but if they don't do that, and the youth later on, some of the youth slip through the cracks, and it's found that the probation officer or the courts did not find permanency for this youth, then later on, the youth can come back, and their supervising agency was probation, so.
Got it. So in other words, as I understand this, I apologize, but I'm not clear on what what the battle is here. So if the child does, there is an opportunity if they've fulfilled all their requirements that you could then petition for them to go back to child welfare services. It's what happens if you don't petition or if the court doesn't accept the petition. The question is, what do we do with those youth? And what they're proposing is that they stay with probation. Why is that a bad thing? Because you have the right and the ability, and I shouldn't say the right, you have the ability and the authority to petition the court so that they actually do go back to child welfare services. And what I hear you saying in support of Senator Bell's bill is that this is for those instances where either you don't petition for the child to go back to child welfare services or the court rejects that application. They're left out in the cold. And what they're suggesting is if they're going to be left out in the cold, for whatever reason, probation should take responsibility. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, the issue is the 241.1 process is in place. The issue is with 240.1 of the Welfare and Institution Code, it's not the court rejecting the petition, it's child welfare agreeing to take the child as file a 300 petition. If the child welfare doesn't agree to file a 300 petition, then the child would have to remain with the 602 petition. It's not appropriate to keep a child on juvenile probation longer than they should be on juvenile probation, subject to all the terms and conditions of probation. So what we're saying is that if the bill mandated child welfare took this kid, that would take that discretionary piece away from child welfare, and they would then take this youth and supervise them in extended foster care.
Okay, thank you. Senator Wojtkowski.
My question was on the front end. We're in juvenile court. I'm the judge. I'm going to sentence you to a bullet. So I know you're going to be in there for a year, and I know at 18 they're going to move you from juvenile to county. So why couldn't we make that determination, now that we know there's a problem, and we want them to remain in foster care, why can't we, because we don't have dispositional hearings in adult court. They don't just say, let's just review how things are going. So I'm empathetic to what probation's saying, and I really don't want probation involved once I finish probation, especially if I'm a youth and they're saying there's no terms for probation. You do your 360 days and you're out. Why would we not want to set a 300 dispositional hearing? That's the language that I did a little bit of juvenile work. On the front end, when we know that these people are going to age out, or we don't put it on their file when they get transferred from juvenile to, before they get transferred out of juvenile facility to the county court, that they are to be re-referred to the 300 system. I mean, I'm trying to solve, I understand it's our responsibility, but it seems to me that when I know that I'm sentencing to them and that they're going to be in the system, I know that if I'm the judge. Anybody want to answer?
Well, I think the court, that's not the practice of the court, but the court could say, so if somebody is a 300 dependent and commits a crime and is sentenced to a year in county jail, and when they complete that year in county jail, they'll be 18 years of age or older, and when they get out, and they won't be eligible for extended foster care because they were in custody at the time of turning 17 and a half, so, or 18. So, but if you set it up in place where that they would be eligible because they were previously in foster care, and what we're saying is that the 300 system, that the social worker then should be this one that supervises that case in extended foster care. That's all we're saying. So they already were 300 at that time, and it would make sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense for probation to be the supervising agency in that case when really didn't have a probation officer working with the kid in foster care because they were in the juvenile facility.
I would just say, I think that this bill is dealing with a pretty narrow population of young people that we've always intended to be protected. The problem is, what is that order on the 18th birthday? We already have youth on probation who haven't finished the terms of their probation on their 18th birthday who are eligible for extended foster care. We have those youth, and we have a mechanism already in existing law through extended foster care to allow those young people after they turn 18 to then go into transition jurisdiction and continue to receive the protections of extended foster care while they're supervised by probation, but no longer as a probation youth, just as an extended foster youth. This bill doesn't change any of that. All it does is say that those two populations of kids who didn't have that order for foster care on their 18th birthday because they had been released to a relative when they should have been placed with a relative because they had been a young person that had been in our 300 system previously, and then just because we found a relative, when we find a relative for a kid in our dependency system, it's a placement. But for some reason, when we find a relative for a youth in a probation system, we just release. And that is really problematic for our relatives. It cuts them off from foster care benefits, and it's problematic for our youth. It cuts them off from extended foster care and extended Medi-Cal. So it fixes that problem. And the second group it fixes is the young people that are in secure confinement on their 18th birthday. But the mechanism that once they complete their probation after 18, it's the same as existing law. It'll use the same path to transition jurisdiction that we already use. So I think it's a little bit of a red herring to say that somehow we're extending this population or we're creating a path into extended foster care that doesn't exist right now, or they should be going back to the dependency system, because we don't do that right now. For our probation youth that are adjudicated as probation youth on their 18th birthday, they still get the protections of extended foster care.
Thank you. I think that clarifies it. I think what you're doing is you're kind of looking at the whole process. This is just taking what exists and just expanding it. Probably a good idea at some point if we take a look at the whole foster care system, but that's not what your bill does. So understand that this is a very small piece of it. Appreciate your concerns, but I think this is just to take what is and expand it just a little bit for this small bit of population that otherwise is sort of in the ether and otherwise unaccounted for. Any other questions? All right, the chair will entertain a motion. Is there a motion? Moved by Senator Wojtkowski. Senator Bell, would you like to close?
I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to say anything.
You're a smart man.
But I'll say this. This is just to get a good handoff so no kid falls in the cracks. That's what we're talking about if you want to get down to it. There's some clunky stuff in probation. It goes on and on and on. We're trying to clean it up, and we will clean it up further as we go through the process. So there's clunky stuff with probation in a lot of these handoff kinds of things. And I'm certainly going to understand their budget thing now. I'll have to look into that as a member of the budget subcommittee with Senator Anderson. So.
Okay. Thank you. With that, Madam Secretary, please call the roll. This is due pass
As amended to appropriations.
as amended to appropriations.
The motion is due pass as amended to the Senate Appropriations Committee. Jackson?
Aye.
Jackson, I. Vidak? Vidak, I. Anderson? Anderson, I. Hertzberg? Leno? Monning? Monning, I. Wachowski? Wachowski, I.
All right. Senator Nguyen.